Hey everyone, we are back and this week's webinar is on Are Your Hormones Out of Whack? A lot of people suffer from adrenal exhaustion. They wake up and they are basically as stiff as a board as they get out of the bed. It takes them almost 30 minutes to get up and get around and get just moving. They're fatigued, their libido's down. They don't heal from injuries like they used to, and they just don't have the zap to go, and they just don't feel like themselves anymore. And these are all hints and clues that your adrenals or your aka hormones may not be leveled right. So in this webinar we want to look at exactly what are hormones and what can we do to help them function better. As we dive deeper into looking at hormones, it's important to understand its relationship with stress. Many people that go to the doctor, they're going for some sort of stress-related illness. And this is really important, and we need to look a little bit closer at different types of stress. There are three common forms of stress. We can have structural stress with our posture, some sort of external injury, or we get things going inside of our body like a chemical stress. Maybe we have a pathogen or something. Or we can even have mental stress from work, finances, and things like that. All these things are going to definitely tie in and could lead to dis-ease in our body. Now, a part of the functional diagnostic nutrition program, one of the things we do right away to look at these stressors, these hidden stressors, is we look at a number of systems in the body. And this will tie in quite well with what we're talking about today. And the first system that we really spend a lot of time looking at is the hormones. And that's what we're talking about today. And these other systems like the immune system, digestive system, detoxification system, energy production, environmental factors, and neurotransmitters, all these systems, a lot of times they can have hidden stressors hidden within them that once we can identify them, we can then kind of create healing opportunities and be able to know how to intelligently go about how to deal with them. So when we're looking at hormones, it can play a huge role in things that are causing stress. And we want to look at this a little bit closer, how the hormones and stress interconnect. To better understand stress and hormones, we need to understand one other piece before we dive into that, and it has to do with the brain. The brain has three primary functions. Number one, it gathers information from the outside world through its sensory organs like your eyes, your ears, and taste, touch, and things like that. That's called input. So the body brings in that information, and then it organizes it, and then it interprets it to try to figure out what to do with that information, and then it gives an output or a command. And it's really this simple: input, organize, output. And that's how the brain basically works. This is important to understand when we look closer at hormones. Okay, so in this picture, we're looking at stress, the one on the left here, how stress comes into the body. Again, the brain then organizes those things and it gives its output, which is part of that command. And here we see the brain sending a message via the hypothalamus down to the pituitary, and the pituitary then sends message to the adrenals to make cortisol in this case. And this is called the HPA axis, hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And this is basically the commands that kind of run down. The hormones are kind of the messengers in between. And another way to explain this is to think of the brain as the CEO, and the hormones are kind of like the middle management or the crew chiefs. So the CEO wants to create something, so he sends this to middle management, and those crew chiefs or middle management then goes to the workers with the plan. And as long as the workers has the raw materials like your fats, your proteins, and carbs in the right amount, and also has the right tools like hammers and nails and things like that, then that system works and the goal is going to be met, the output, the outcome will be met. However, if anywhere in this line there's a miscommunication, say we don't have enough hormones, or the enzymes are not there, the raw materials are not there, or the tools aren't there, or the CEO is not given the commands, we're not going to be able to respond properly to the stress. And this is really important. So hormones play a huge role in sending the commands to the rest of the body to deal with certain stresses. We're going to look at 7 key hormones today. And again, it's going to be really important just to understand a basic definition of a hormone. A hormone is a substance, usually a peptide, referring to protein, a steroid, and produced by one tissue and conveyed by the bloodstream to another to affect physiology activities such as growth and metabolism. Hormones are essential for every activity of life, including processes of digestion, metabolism, growth, reproduction, and mood control. And it's really, really key. Again, these are really the messengers of the body that start a whole bunch of different tasks to deal with stress. And that's why they're so important when we're looking at stress, and we want to look closer and see if the hormones are actually balanced. The 7 hormones we're going to be looking at is pregnenolone, cortisol, DHEA, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and melatonin. Pregnenolone is our master steroidal hormone. Now, pregnenolone, when you look at the top of this chart here, I'll just kind of draw a circle around pregnenolone here. We see it way here at the top, and it really, a lot of the other hormones like DHEA, your testosterone, and your different estrogens all come from pregnenolone. Even progesterone and cortisol all come from pregnenolone. And so this is a really, really important steroidal hormone because it's the precursor to everything below here. But I want to bring your attention to what pregnenolone is actually made from, the vitamin B's and dietary fats. Now this is kind of important because if you're not getting the right types of fats in your diet and not having the right B's, you're not going to be able to make pregnenolone. But this is kind of an interesting tidbit. As forms cholesterol, and specifically LDL. I don't know if you guys can see this. I'll try to color it in here. LDL. It's the LDL cholesterol that's actually converted into to make pregnenolone. And this is interesting because when I look at individuals' blood panel lipid markers and I see elevated LDL levels, then if those same people run a hormone panel and say all their sex hormones like estrogens and cortisol and even testosterone are relatively low or not where they should be, then we know we have a conversion issue with LDL not being converted into pregnenolone. Now, what's really important to understand is that there are a specific group of enzymes that are responsible for this conversion of LDL into pregnenolone, and these are basically liver enzymes, and they're very, very, write liver down here if I can, liver, the liver enzymes are responsible for the conversion of LDL to pregnenolone, and a lot of people that have this pattern of the high LDL but low hormones, it's actually an issue of conversion in the liver where they're not able to convert the LDL into pregnenolone. Just by getting the liver to actually work better in this one little area, you can actually improve someone's not only markers on tests, but actually function quite a bit. And as we go through this, you're going to find out how important the liver really is when it comes to hormones. But the first hormone we want to look at is pregnenolone, and we want to make sure that we're having adequate amounts since it's the precursor to all the steroidal hormones. Our second hormone that we want to look at is cortisol. And cortisol is known as the anti-stress hormone. And as you see, when we looked at the other picture with the stress, the hypothalamus, the brain, sends a message to the pituitary, and the pituitary sends a message to the adrenals to produce cortisol to normally deal with this stressful issue. And we're going to look a little bit closer at cortisol. Signs and symptoms of high cortisol levels include a whole bunch of things it increases and a whole bunch of things it decreases, including it increases blood sugar levels, which is obviously bad for if you have blood sugar issues to begin with. It increases blood pressure, increases anxiety, increases weight gain, and normally it's normally around the midsection, right around the belly button. When cortisol levels go high, also a puffy face. People look really swollen in the face when their cortisol levels are high. Increased thirst. It decreases immune system function. And during the thyroid webinar, we talked about how high cortisol will inhibit secretory IgA in the gut, which is a major part of our immune system, but it will also inhibit the white blood cells as well, which will kind of mute those. And definitely, if the cortisol is high, your chances of an infection can go greatly be increased and cause a lot of different issues with the immune system being decreased in function. It also decreases um, serotonin, and that ties into mood and also sleep. That's another thing. It decreases sleep, it decreases thyroid function, and also decreases libido. So there's a lot of things where we want to make sure that cortisol isn't too high, that we actually have it in the right balance. And another thing, if it's too low, then the symptoms even become more chronic, and it's been going on for a lot longer. Normally, when someone is first dealing with stress, they will have high cortisol levels, but over years, if they have high cortisol levels, that will start dropping off, and it will even become more serious of an issue when they don't actually produce cortisol. That means they're not responding to the stress anymore. They're not actually responding properly. So, nevertheless, this is some signs and symptoms of high cortisol levels. A normal cortisol pattern is pretty simple. It basically follows the rhythm of the sun. When the sun goes up, the cortisol levels in our bodies go up, and it actually helps us wake up in the morning. And as we approach noon, and actually throughout the morning, they'll be kind of raising up, and as they hit noon, they'll start becoming back down. And towards sunset, cortisol should fall off, and a lot of the more anabolic type hormones then take over. And it's this rhythm, this high cortisol relatively early on in the day, then dropping off during sunset, is kind of what we typically want to see. If we see an inverted graph where the morning's super low and really doesn't get up, or in the evening is high cortisol, then that's going to definitely interfere with sleep, and there's going to be a lot of different problems. So we want to definitely have a basic understanding of the rhythm of cortisol when we're looking at this hormone. One of the ways we can assess the HPA axis, that hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis, is to test the cortisol, which is a byproduct of that in response to stress. And we can see if the body is actually responding properly. So there's two tests I like to run, the BioHealth 205 and also the Dutch Complete. Actually, a couple different the Dutch labs, but this test below is a Dutch lab. And you can see way off on the right that it shows the 24 free cortisol and also what's called the metabolized cortisol. And the stars are kind of the reference range somewhat. Like, for example, for the 24 free cortisol, you see 80 to 180, the two stars, but this individual is 239. So you can see their free cortisol is much higher, and their metabolized cortisol is even higher yet outside of that side, and that's the amount that they have actually metabolized through their body. And when we look over on the graph on the left, we can actually see that this pattern during the day is much higher than it should be. The client has, I'll try to highlight it here, they're way out there. This is them right here, and the reference range is below. So they're outside of that reference range, and they're basically elevated all throughout the day. So this person is kind of what would be typically known as a stage 1 adrenal exhaustion, where they have a stress and they are responding to it, but they're producing a whole bunch of cortisol, which have all those symptoms we just mentioned they may be experiencing, like anxiety and things like that. So what we'll want to do is try to get this back down and figure out what's causing this high cortisol in the body. But this is a good test to be able to kind of pinpoint and figure out where cortisol is at. The next hormone we're going to look at is DHEA, and is known as the growth and repair hormone. It's important to understand that the cortisol is more of a catabolic hormone, and the DHEA, as we already mentioned, is a repair and build up. So one's really more catabolic, the cortisol, and the DHEA is more anabolic. Catabolic means breaking down. Anabolic means building up. And there's a certain amount of ratio between these two, 5 to 1, 6 to 1, ideally somewhere in there, where these hormones should be at. And if they get get flipped around a little bit, it can cause a lot of problems, a lot of different systems of the body. So this breaking up and building up, or breaking down and building up, we want to have it balanced in the body. It's very important to assess this ratio. I also want to mention that the DHEA is also the precursor to testosterone and the different estrogens as well. So it's important that we actually keep um, have a want to keep this up on the anabolic side, and it becomes an issue when we can't balance between the DHEA and the cortisol. And what will typically happen is something called the pregnenolone steal, where pregnenolone under stress will shuttle everything over here to the cortisol to deal with the stress, and this number will normally raise up relative to the DHEA normally will go down. So hopefully this makes sense a little bit, but we want to make sure that that ratio between the cortisol and the DHEA is balanced. Our next hormone is estrogen, and it is known as the female hormone. I should mention that although it's known as the female hormone, it's important that even guys have a little bit of it, or they'll have a little bit of issues. So let's actually look at some benefits of estrogen. 6 benefits of estrogen include increasing energy levels, muscle tone, sex drive, performance, concentration, memory, moods, and sleep. 5 signs and symptoms of low estrogen levels include hot flashes, vaginal dryness, moodiness, night sweats, and low sex drive. Okay, I want to make a quick comment before we move on, and talk a little bit about the difference between the HPA axis and the HPG axis. And last week for the thyroid, we talked about the PT axis, the hypothalamic pituitary thyroid axis, and today we're looking at the HPA, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, but we can't do that alone without the HPG, which is the hypothalamic gonadal axis, and this deals with the ovaries and the testes to produce testosterone in the testicles, and with the ovaries, estrogen and progesterone. And the reason why I want to bring this up is that when a woman is cycling, predominantly the estrogen and progesterone are going to be coming through the HPG axis. Later on, when she quits cycling, the adrenals will take over that load. So it is possible for someone during their cycling years to have actually an estrogen dominance. Then after like postmenopausal, that same woman with different circumstances could then actually become estrogen deficient if for some reason her adrenals aren't working up to par and things like that. So I mean, it is possible for that to happen, and it's kind of important to understand the difference between what chains of from the brain to down to these different organs is working at which cycle of life, and by knowing how to assess these different chains is actually very, very important. So although we're talking about the HPA axis, I did want to bring up this since we are going to be talking about the ovaries and the testicles for guys for testosterone production. Here is some of the signs and symptoms of high estrogen levels. Now, this is more common amongst the women out there, and it has a lot to do with even environmental factors, which we'll talk about here soon. But here is a short list of the that's even a long list of these different symptoms and weight gains, again around the belly and the hips, that area, cellulite, fatigue, decreased oxygen levels, heavy menstrual bleeding is very common, sodium and fluid retention, blood clots, thyroid nodules, fibroids, endometriosis, constipation, sleep disturbances, PMS, cramps, low blood pressure. It's interesting because estrogen will actually increase vasodilation, which will lead to possibly the headaches and the migraines too. So there's a connection between the low blood pressure and the headaches and migraines. Impaired blood sugar control, PCOS, autoimmune conditions. We mentioned last time when we were talking about the thyroid that estrogen actually downregulates the immune system. So if the estrogen levels are high, you can actually, it's a lot likely to develop not only get an infection, but over time you can have miscommunication of the immune system and develop an autoimmune condition. Infertility problems, can't get pregnant and can't keep a baby if the estrogen is not balanced with progesterone. Ovarian cysts, fibrocystic breast disease, and a number of cancers, including breast cancer. And estrogen has been linked to a number of different things. So it is a very important thing. That's why we're spending a little bit more time talking about it. Not that the other hormones aren't important, but this is definitely one that it seems like is being purposely somewhat attacked and elevated, so people can't reproduce and cause a number of health issues. In men, some of the same symptoms: weight gains, low sex drive, infertility, impotency, erectile dysfunction. Very common for males to develop breast, large prostate, prostate cancer, testicular cancer, and the list goes on. But it's important to understand that if you're having these type of symptoms, then you may want to definitely consider having your hormones evaluated and see where they're at. It also is definitely a hint that the liver gallbladder is probably can't handle the excessive hormones as well. Now, here are 10 causes of high estrogen or estrogen dominance relative to progesterone. And we're going to talk about this more maybe in another webinar, but the fungus link, or the link between fungus and estrogen, is actually quite well known. So if you're having yeast issues, or a lot of times you're going to definitely have high estrogen and vice versa. Also heavy metals, and we talked about that a little bit last time as well, that those also are very estrogenic and can really boost estrogen levels. So those are two main causes. An overloaded liver will also cause excessive estrogen levels, because if you can't chelate them out of the body through the bile and through the feces, then you'll just keep circulating them in the system. So it's important to have a liver that's working properly. Foods, there's a number of foods, and water can be a major problem when it comes to estrogen. For example, you may not be realizing you're eating foods that are estrogenic. Kind of, for example, different oils, like you use canola oil. It would be kind of like taking a birth control. It will definitely boost your estrogen levels off. Not a good thing. So there are a whole bunch of different foods that can definitely affect your estrogen levels. Another one, I'll just mention another one, caffeine, for example. And it's been shown in studies that when women consume 500 milligrams of caffeine daily, which is equivalent to about 4 to 5 cups, they had nearly a 70% increase in estrogen compared to women who only consume no more than 100 milligrams of caffeine daily. That's about 1 cup of coffee. So that's huge. If you have 1 cup of coffee versus having 4 or 5, that woman who had the 4 to 5 had a 70% increase in estrogen versus those. Another interesting thing to consider is that individuals over the age of 35 also, if they were had consumed over 600 milligrams of caffeine, it basically was tied into a 50% reduction in the chances of getting pregnant. So that's a really important thing to consider, the fact that very high caffeine levels for a lot of people is not going to be a good thing. It's going to definitely boost your estrogen up. So if you already have estrogen issues, that's probably going to be something you're going to need to definitely limit in the diet. But water is another source of estrogen, depending on what's in it too as well. So getting clean water source is good. Personal products is a huge topic. The average woman puts about 126 different personal products on their skin or around their body, in their body, every single day. So looking at those and seeing if they have anything that needs to be removed is huge. Guys also 25 personal products on average daily. Plastics also cause high estrogen levels. Imbalanced gut bacteria is another big one. And also hormone replacement therapy and birth control also will throw off estrogen levels. Some of them do have high progesterone, but most of them a lot of times will have high estrogen levels. High body fat percentage will also be a major contributor to high estrogen levels. Here's a quote from Wendy Myers I thought was really good. From the age of 35 to 50, there is a 70% reduction in the production of progesterone in the body. Estrogen during the same period only declines 35%. Now, this is kind of important because a lot of people tend to already be estrogen dominant. So after the age of 35 to 50, there's this natural reduction in progesterone. So this will shift that imbalance between the estrogen and progesterone just naturally with age. Now is that because of the environment that this shift is during that period of time? But it's just interesting that there's a natural reduction there. So this may be even more important when you're 35 and up to really try to balance these hormones. By menopausal, the total number of progesterone made is extremely low, while estrogen is still present in the body at about half the premenopausal level. So it's kind of important to consider when looking at high estrogen levels. All right, we want to look at a few different types of estrogens, and estrone, or E1, is the predominant estrogen during the postmenopausal years, and estradiol, also known as E2, is the predominant estrogen produced during cycling, or the cycling years, and estriol, E3, is the predominant estrogen produced during pregnancy. And it's important to know, we've already talked about DHEA, and you can kind of see how it can actually follow this line and produce the estrogens, but it's also important to look at testosterone and how it shuttles down to estradiol through this pathway here. And this can be accomplished through the enzyme aromatase, which I think maybe some of you may have heard of this enzyme, especially for people that have a high estrogen. If they have too much of this aromatase or too much of the testosterone is being converted over into estradiol, that could definitely cause a problem. So, especially for guys too, we want to normally have our testosterone to estradiol or estrogen ratio to be a 50 to 1, and especially via blood test. And a lot of people, unfortunately, if they have too much of this aromatase, they will basically have a much lower ratio, more like 8 to 1. So it's important to make sure we're not eating things that are going to be promoting aromatase, and maybe eating things that also help inhibit it. One thing I want to mention is that over here on the right, I have inserted a lab of a marker for zinc. This is a hair test. You can see that 20 is kind of like the ideal range right there, and that this individual is only about a 5. So this is a problem, because the reason why I wanted to bring this up is that zinc is a major aromatase inhibitor. It blocks aromatase, therefore it will reduce the amount of estradiol you're creating from testosterone. And also, it's important to know that zinc is a natural antifungal, which it seems like it does both those things. It lowers that whole fungus link, plus it helps with lowering estrogen levels. It is also noteworthy that the Walsh Institute, that kind of specializes in different types of neurological nutritional programming, has found in their testing that zinc is like one of the #1 deficiencies across the board for mental health type markers. So with that being said, zinc is really important. It's something to consider it when you have high estrogen levels. Now, one cool thing about the Dutch lab, it actually assesses the E1, E2, and E3. As you can see at the top of this test, all 3 of these are marked right here, and you can get an idea where someone's at. For example, this individual on the E2 marker in the middle here, they're outside of their optimal ranges between the stars, which is 1.8 to 4.5, and this individual is 6.1. So it can tell you what's kind of going on just with their values, but it gives a lot more information than that. It also tells you the pathways in which they're metabolizing, and this is critically important because there is a protective pathway, and the other ones are very carcinogenic and can actually be can damage DNA if you find them to be going down the wrong pathway. So this has a lot to do with liver function, and it's an assessment of the different phases of detoxification via the liver, phase 1 and phase 2. And we can actually see how well the body is methylating down here on the left corner here. Like, for example, this individual is not methylating the way they want to, actually a very low marker here. You'll notice that the 2-methoxy E1 should be about half the number here, and it is not, meaning that the methylation is not occurring, and that means you're going to have some issues there. And the fact that the liver's not doing its job is a hint that you want to definitely spend some time addressing liver gallbladder function to basically make sure we're dealing with estrogen properly in the body. This is a very good lab in the case of looking for pre-cancerous type things and abnormal estrogen levels, DNA issues. This is an outstanding lab. It gives us a lot of insight into liver function that is absolutely critical when it comes to estrogen metabolism. Moving along, the next hormone we're going to look at is progesterone, and progesterone is known as the baby keeper hormone. 4 benefits of progesterone include it selectively rejects foreigners. This is one reason why when a woman gets pregnant, her progesterone levels spike through the roof. And as the name suggests, progestation is progestation. Its main objective is to protect, to keep the baby, but you need to have these levels up enough to be able to do this. And when hormones get really high, a lot of women, especially with the progesterone, will sometimes get sick. It's almost an indication that that progesterone and different hormones during pregnancy are elevated. It also means maybe your liver and gallbladder could use a little bit of help to kind of move those excessive hormones out of the system. But nevertheless, it's kind of interesting to know that it will selectively reject foreigners, and this may be one reason why women get extremely sick if they eat certain things or different smells during pregnancies, because this progesterone level skyrockets during this time. It's also a precursor to cortisol, cortisone, estrogen, and testosterone through some different pathways. So in that case, it's very important to keep this hormone balanced with estrogen. It also helps with bone density and healthy myelin sheaths, which are the fatty conduction pads on the axon. So so it helps a lot with people with any type of neurological issue whatsoever. So progesterone is very protective, very calming in the body. So a very awesome hormone that we would definitely want to keep balanced with progesterone or estrogen. We're going to look just real briefly at just kind of an ideal monthly cycle, or kind of have how the hormones map during that time. At the beginning of the cycle, the follicular stage, while the development's happening, the follicle-stimulating hormones release, which will actually boost estrogen relatively early in the cycle, and kind of are really climaxing during right around the ovulation time, day 13 through 15. And at that time, also the luteinizing hormone really peaks, and this will later on bring in progesterone. Will signal progesterone to be produced, and that will be the predominant hormone during the latter part of the cycle. And it's kind of important to kind of see this pattern, because when we're looking to assess and get into the details if people are having cycle issues or infertility, it's kind of important to know this basic layout of the rhythm of the hormones. Just a little plug in here. I thought I'd throw it in here just to kind of put the word out. I will have, for those interested, a 40-week master kind of guide, nutrition and lifestyle for basically for ladies or whoever wants to read it. But basically, it's going to have not only what the phases that you're going through, what's being developed in the baby during those 40 weeks, but also nutrition insights, what nutrition helps throughout the whole entire pregnancy for the 40 weeks, kind of laid out. And not too many, I have not seen very many books or manuals or anything that kind of addresses that aspect. So obviously, it is worth mentioning that you want to be dealing with your nutrition way before you get pregnant, because a lot of people don't realize they're even pregnant until much later on, and many of the things in the baby are already developed at that time. So it's kind of important to actually have a healthy lifestyle in general. But this resource may be greatly benefit you to just trying to have a healthy pregnancy. I'd like to cover something called the 4 PMS types. PMS-A stands for anxiety, and it's estimated that about 65 to 75% of women who deal with PMS have this type of PMS. And this is the type of PMS that is high estrogen, low progesterone, but it's characteristic of having anxiety for the A, irritable, mood swings, and insomnia. And I will say, in like Eastern medicine, the liver is kind of known if people are having mood issues or anger, irritability. It's almost a sign that the liver is not working up to par, and we've already been kind of making mention of that when it comes to elevated estrogen, or anything for that matter. The liver will have to kind of detoxify it. But it is interesting that anxiety and irritability and the mood stuff tying into liver function is really, really important. Again, the estrogen is more stimulating to the central nervous system, where progesterone calms it. The key supplements that may need to be added during day 14 to 28 of a cycle to help balance out the progesterone and estrogen. If you do testing and find out that you in fact do have a estrogen dominance and you're not producing enough progesterone, you may need to try to supplement or strategically diet during that time. Also, it's kind of interesting to note that a lot of people with this particular PMS also are deficient a lot of times in an enzyme called lipase, which helps break down the fats, the lipids. And one of the referral areas is if you have like at the top of the neck, the trap muscle, that whole area A lot of times we'll have referred pain when people are deficient in lipase. And just a side note, for people that have TMJ issues, a lot of times the enzyme protease, a lot of people are deficient in the enzyme protease if tied into TMJ issues, which is a protein enzyme. But nevertheless, one thing these individuals want to do with PMS A is definitely work on liver function. PMSC stands for cravings, and it's estimated that 33% of women with the PMS have this type of PMS. And obviously, the C stands for cravings and strong appetite, and very often ties into headaches, which, as we mentioned earlier, high estrogen levels can cause vasodilation, lead to headaches and migraines. So again, this pattern is also high estrogen, low progesterone, but just a little bit different symptoms. It's also interesting, a lot of people will crave chocolate during this time, which is kind of a hint of the need for progesterone, and since some of the precursors can be found in chocolate. Also, it's an issue with a lot of times with poor digestion and assimilation of carbs. They have issues with carbs and may need the enzyme amylase, which to help deal and break those down. Improving blood sugar and adrenal balance can definitely help someone with PMSC. Vitamins like B complexes, red raspberry, which is known for being a promoter of progesterone, can be helpful. Eating according to one's metabolism or metabolic type can be extremely helpful, because eating the right amount of high quality proteins can kind of balance this blood sugar thing that a lot of people suffer with. So, and it can kind of help with the cravings in general too. If you're not getting enough protein, good fats, then you'll be continually eating cheaper carbs and things like that. PMSD stands for depression, and this is kind of an inverted one. This is where the progesterone is actually high. And again, these individuals have depression, forgetfulness, confusion, sluggish. And one that I really notice a big time when the progesterone is high is emotional instability. Basically, I've had even some guys with really high progesterone levels where their wife was on a birth control, but it was actually one that really boosted progesterone instead of estrogen. And when we actually tested him, because he was having symptoms of crying and things, and which is very uncommon for a guy, if they're crying for no reason at all, that their hormones definitely are off. So when we tested him, his progesterone was through the roof, and the only way he could possibly have that is through some sort of birth control, and it was actually transdermally being infused in his body as well. So it actually had his progesterone levels way too high, and causing that kind of depression, emotional thing. So this is very common. A lot of women that try things to balance out progesterone, if they take too much, they will get very emotional, and it's very common. So it's also important to check for heavy metal toxicity, especially lead, and there may be some things to help chelate with that as well. PMSH stands for hyperhydration, and it's very common for individuals like this to gain a number of pounds early on in the cycle, and just swelling, fluid retention, abdominal bloating, and breast tenderness before the cycle. And one of the first things we need to ask is how much caffeine are they actually consuming during that time. Again, for this individual, sodium and potassium balance are a must. You may want to eat foods that are going to be, even if they do have sodium in them, like celery, which is a natural diuretic, you probably want to also balance, whether you test via hair analysis or a blood test, you want to definitely know where your sodium potassium levels are, and eat accordingly. So these four things: PMS A, PMS C, PMS D, and PMS H, kind of give us an idea. If you're dealing with PMS, maybe it gives us hints on how to go about addressing it. For individuals that want a little bit more precision on their hormone cycling, especially for menstrual cycle, Dutch has a really awesome lab called cycle mapping, and I just want to talk a little bit about what it can do. One of the awesome things with Dutch is that it tests the metabolites plus the other organic acids and things like that to assess the estrogen progesterone. But the metabolites are how much is kind of exiting the body, and a lot of different labs don't show this information, which is really critical. But for this particular test, it's more than 1 day collection for this cycling mapping, and it's actually 9 different collections on different days from day 4 of the cycle all the way to day, I believe, 26. So basically it's plotted on this graph, and there's literally reference ranges for everything, so you can kind of track to see where these metabolites are at. You also get a good understanding of where the estradiol and the progesterone are with the Dutch mapping as well. I just wanted to point out a few things that on the top graph you can notice this estradiol, it really spikes up outside of the optimal range. This red is the client. You can see the estradiol is up higher than where it should be, then it scoops back down. And actually, if you look at the bottom graph too, the progesterone is also high and outside at the beginning of the cycle as well, where it should be. So there's some things that definitely this can shed light into by looking at these different patterns of progesterone and estrogen. The next hormone we're going to look at briefly is testosterone, and this is known as the male hormone. Six benefits of testosterone include increasing muscle mass, decreasing body fat, having stronger bones, helps with depression, increases libido, and better sleep, just to name a few. The ideal ratio when on a blood lab is you want to have, as I mentioned earlier, testosterone to estrogen ratio 50 to 1, and unfortunately a lot of people have more close to 8 to 1. So it's ideal to try to achieve that. I will say the blood lab for testosterone is probably definitely the better marker than even the dried urine sample. But nevertheless, I have placed one cool thing the Dutch lab does show is not only the estrogen or testosterone availability, but also the different pathways, the alpha, the 5 beta and the 5 alpha pathways, and just kind of looking to see where this testosterone is going, and different whether there are pathways that kind of tend to lead to the kind of the whole male baldness pattern or whatnot. So it actually gives us a lot of information on kind of what's going on in the body. I will be speaking a lot more about testosterone in the future. I actually have a program coming out, 101 Ways to Boost Testosterone Naturally, and we'll be doing a webinar to kind of kick that off and talking a little bit more about it in detail. So today I won't go too much into it, just to say that the Dutch Complete Lab, again, is a great lab to look at when looking at testosterone. Again, I do think the blood work lab would be even a little bit better if you really want to get a testosterone marker to find out where you're at. And again, the ratio to estrogen should be 50 to 1. All right, last but not least, we're going to look at melatonin, which is known as the sleep hormone. I want to point out that melatonin, although Some of the melatonin actually made by the pineal gland. You can see that melatonin number right there. A lot of this melatonin is actually made in the gut. A lot of people don't realize this, and actually most of the serotonin is made in the gut. And serotonin is a precursor to melatonin down here. So one problem is, one indication on the Dutch lab, which actually tests melatonin, if we see this number low, it kind of indicates gut issues. And just like for serotonin, your gut bacteria needs to be balanced in order for serotonin to be at an ideal level. And if serotonin is low, then melatonin is low. So both of those, serotonin and melatonin, tie into sleep. 4 signs and symptoms of low melatonin levels include insomnia, poor immune response, and constipation, weight gains, and increased appetite. Again, melatonin is a very protective substance in the body. There's a lot of interesting research with enhanced immune function when melatonin is in the right place, and it can definitely protect from a lot of different things. So very powerful. Okay, we're going to look at 8 ways you can balance your hormones. The first thing you want to do to balance your hormones is to get sleep. And this is probably the most important thing. You want to actually try to get down to bed around 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Now, if it's a little bit later during the summer, that's fine, but ideally that would be the best 8-hour window, and to make sure we're getting the physical repair and the psychological repair as well. But getting to sleep is huge, because this is when a lot of these anabolic type hormones and repair type hormones come in. So in dealing with repairing the body, sleep is one of the top things you can do when you're having adrenal issues, is to get proper sleep. Now, there could be other reasons why you're not sleeping or staying asleep, have to do with the adrenal exhaustion and dealing with other things, but that you definitely, that you want that be a major goal, to get a good amount of sleep at the right time. Getting 8 hours at a shifted over may not be the same as the 10 to 6 window. So this is a huge first step to balance your hormones. The second way you can balance your hormones is to literally go organic. Going organic means that you're eliminating the chemicals that a lot of people spray, pesticides, fungicides, and herbicides, and just all sorts of different things on plants. And we just want to avoid those. Many of them are very estrogenic, and just they are endocrine disruptors. They were designed to destroy the brains and the reproductive systems of the little pests. And if you eat a whole bunch of foods that have that on there, your brain and your reproductive system will also be destroyed. So go organic if you can afford it. I highly recommend it. It's probably one of the most important things you can do. If you're on a budget and you really maybe can't afford organic for whatever reason, the Dirty Dozen Clean 15 list that comes out every year is very beneficial, because it tells you the top sprayed foods. For example, every year it seems like it's strawberries, which has an average of 7 to 21 different chemicals they find on them. Off on the left here, you can see this Dirty Dozen list. On those foods, you want to probably definitely buy organic. You could not pay me to eat a non-organic strawberry, because of how devastating it can be to your health. At the same time, the Clean 15, a lot of these foods over here, they're the least sprayed, and if you must, you could probably try to buy a non-organic variety if you just can't afford it, of the Clean 15. This way you can save a little bit of money. It's believed that if you follow this list, buying organic for the Dirty Dozen, and maybe saving a little bit on the Clean 15, that you're going to avoid almost 80% of the chemicals that come inside your body via food. So this is a huge this can help the liver tremendously lower the load. So this tip is enormous when it comes to balancing the hormones. Eating according to your metabolism or metabolic type is really important. This can be assessed via hair analysis or questionnaire, different things like that. But keeping the blood sugar steady and eating the right type of foods, fats, proteins, and carbs in the right ratios are really important. So it is important that you discover your metabolic type and eat accordingly. Avoid plastics. Plastics will definitely cause things like xenoestrogens and all these different estrogens that are attached to plastics. You definitely just want to avoid them. Um, and especially at stores where they'll leave their plastic bottles outside in the sun. When I'm down in Austin, Texas, sometimes I see this where they'll just have their water bottles outside in the blazing sun, and it can't be good. Almost like a microwave just heating up that plastic. And if you ever tasted water from a bottle like that, you can almost taste the plastic. It's not a good thing at all if you can actually taste that. So yeah, avoid plastic as much as possible. Even the BPA-free stuff is not a guarantee. So really try to maybe use glass if you can and avoid plastic. Another huge topic is avoiding harmful chemicals in personal products. And this, I won't talk about it very much here, but the parabens and things like that that are can boost your estrogen levels to the roof, almost like taking a birth control. Maybe in your personal products, you don't even realize that you're putting them on every single day. And then another one is, yeah, this is a huge thing. So there's a lot more that can be said about this, but yeah, your environmental and personal products is very important to balance your hormone levels. Reduce your toxic heavy metal exposure. And this one may be a little tricky, but we definitely want to make sure we're not eating things or consuming things or putting things on our body that are going to increase heavy metal exposure. For example, aluminum in deodorants and things like that that people put on, that stuff gets absorbed right through the body, and that can majorly spike your estrogen levels and cause serious problems. Even with the breast cancer and things like that, it is highly recommended not to use aluminum like that. And I have two labs. This is a hair analysis, and these two labs are actually from infants. And you may be shocked, but a lot of babies are born with extremely high heavy metals, and they get these heavy metals via the placenta. The mother normally dishes off to the children, and a lot of these heavy metals, not only do they cause high estrogen levels, but they can be devastating in many ways, the neurological system and things like that. So if there's learning disabilities or speech impediments and things like that, by getting these heavy metals down is really key. You want to reduce the exposure to them as much as possible. Step 7 is improve liver and gallbladder function. As already mentioned, liver gallbladder is essential for detoxification, especially of excess hormones, heavy metals, medications, you name it. So if you want to get your hormones balanced, really important to get your liver gallbladder online. The eighth way we can improve our hormones is actually test our hormones. And this is really important because for people who have major issues with their hormones or think they do, without testing, you really don't know for sure which direction you should go. And one of the tests I really like a lot to run is the Dutch test. And they actually have a couple of them depending on what you're looking at. But they've just, as of January 2018, they've even expanded and made it better by adding organic acids of the neurotransmitters, metabolites, and also nutritional organic acids. And what this means is it also assesses brain function like serotonin, dopamine, things like that, and key nutritional markers like for B6, B12, and glutathione, which are huge for methylation and different things like that. So not only is it testing for the adrenal profile, but it's also giving great insights, and it helps people get a way better understanding of what's going on with the hormones. Again, I'd like to thank you for listening in. We have covered the hormones and some basic guidelines you can do to help improve your hormones. If you have more serious issues and you really want to balance your hormones, I'm going to leave some options below, options C, B, and A, to give some more information for people that really want to maybe test their hormones or get to the root cause and to, get their hormones balanced. So thanks again. Until next time, shalom.